Let me put this. It's not that I don't value it. Let me just lay it here for a half a second so I can use this hand for the mic.
Robert Conrad was once one of the biggest stars on television. Tough, fearless, and unstoppable. But behind the fame was a life full of pain, controversy, and regret. From a shocking accident to a quiet, tragic end, his story is far from the Hollywood dream. Join us as we dive into the heartbreaking rise and fall of Robert Conrad, TV's toughest star. Robert Conrad was born Conrad Robert Falk on March 1, 1935, in Chicago, Illinois. His early life was far from easy. His father, Leonard Falk, left the family when Robert was still very young, and he was raised mostly by his mother, Alice Jacqueline Hartman. She worked hard as a publicist and later became the first female publicity agent at Warner Brothers. But things were tough at home. Growing up in Chicago during the 1930s and 1940s wasn't easy for anyone, but especially not for a boy like Robert, who had to grow up fast. He was surrounded by tough neighborhoods and rough crowds. As a teenager, he didn't shy away from hard work. He took on all kinds of jobs just to help out and get by. He loaded and unloaded trucks, worked construction, sang in local nightclubs, and even delivered milk early in the mornings. He was a hustler in the purest sense, always on the move and never afraid of hard labor. School didn't hold his interest for long. He dropped out of high school before graduating and didn't seem to care much for rules or authority. He had a bit of a wild streak, often getting into trouble and fighting with teachers or classmates. His athletic background helped shape the man he would become on screen. His comfort with physical challenges later helped him do his own stunts in movies and television shows. In fact, Robert Conrad became famous for rarely using stunt doubles, something very few actors dared to do at the time. But that fearless attitude started long before the cameras were rolling. It began in the streets and gyms of Chicago. In his early 20s, Conrad packed up and moved to Los Angeles. He had no guarantees, no Hollywood connections at first, and no formal acting training. But he had ambition, charm, and a drive that couldn't be ignored. At first, things were slow. He took whatever work he could find. He worked as a milkman for a while to pay the bills and attended night classes to improve his speech. He also studied acting, eager to learn, even though he didn't always like being told how to perform. His big break came through a friendship with actor Nick Adams, a rising star at the time. Adams believed in Conrad and introduced him to casting directors and producers. Those introductions opened doors that had previously been shut. Soon after, Conrad started landing small roles in films and TV shows. These early parts were often brief, but they gave him experience and got him noticed. Eventually, his talent and tough guy charm caught the attention of Warner Bros. In the late 1950s. They cast him in the TV show Hawaiian Eye, where he played Tom Lapaka, a private detective. This role gave him national exposure and helped build his reputation in the industry. He became a recognizable face on television and started to develop a fan base. But his biggest and most iconic role came in 1965, when he was cast as Secret Service agent James T. West in the hit show The Wild Wild West. The show was a mix of Western adventure and spy thriller. Conrad's performance stood out immediately. He brought intensity, charisma, and physical energy to the role. He insisted on doing nearly all his own stunts, which made the action scenes feel more real and exciting. It also led to several injuries over the years, but Conrad never backed down. And next, we'll look at how his rise to stardom brought success, danger, and drama like nothing he'd ever faced before. The Wild Wild West and tough guy persona. By the mid-1960s, Robert Conrad was no longer just another face in Hollywood. He had already gained attention for his role on Hawaiian Eye, but it was the Wild Wild West that launched him into full-blown stardom. The show first aired in 1965 and ran until 1969. It was a unique mix of Western adventure and high-tech spy fiction. Often compared to the James Bond films of the time, Conrad played Secret Service agent James T. West, a sharp-dressed, fearless government operative working to protect President Ulysses S. Grant during the 1870s. Because of this, the action scenes in the Wild Wild West felt real. Audiences loved that. They could see the difference. Conrad got injured multiple times during filming. One of the worst injuries came when he fell headfirst during a stunt and landed on his head and neck. He was hospitalized, and production had to stop while he recovered. But instead of hiring a stunt double after that, Conrad returned and kept doing the dangerous scenes himself. That level of dedication built his reputation as one of the toughest guys in television. Fans quickly fell in love with his rugged good looks, intense stare, and fearless attitude. His character was charming but deadly, always a step ahead of the bad guys. The show developed a strong following, especially among young viewers and action lovers. Even today, The Wild Wild West is considered one of the most creative and unique shows from that era. It gave Conrad the superstar status he had always dreamed of. But success came at a cost. Conrad started to feel the pressure of fame. He was doing almost everything on the show: acting, fighting, stunts, and it began to take a toll on his body. At the same time, he started to realize that people weren't seeing him as an actor. They were only seeing the tough guy. After The Wild Wild West ended in 1969, Robert Conrad remained in demand. He was known for action roles, and producers were eager to cast him in similar projects. He starred in the World War II drama Ba Ba Black Sheep from 1976 to 1978, playing Major Greg Pappy Boyington, a real-life U.S. Marine Corps fighter pilot. Like James T. West, the character was bold, rebellious, and brave, traits Conrad played naturally. Before that, he had already made waves with Hawaiian Eye, which ran from 1959 to 1963, where he played private investigator Tom Lopaka. That role gave him early fame, but it was also another tough guy character. Throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, Conrad starred in many made-for-TV movies and miniseries, most of which had a strong physical or military theme. He played cops, soldiers, cowboys, and men who solved problems with their fists more often than with words. While these roles kept him busy and well-paid, they also began to box him in. Robert Conrad wanted to be taken seriously as a dramatic actor, but the industry didn't give him many chances to show that side. Casting directors saw him as the macho action hero and nothing more. He tried to push for deeper, more emotional roles, but offers rarely came. This typecasting became a serious source of frustration for him. He often spoke in interviews about how hard it was to break free from the image that made him famous. He felt stuck. People loved the character, but didn't always see the man behind it. He once said he could do more than just throw punches and glare at the camera, but he wasn't given the opportunity to prove it. Still, he didn't stop working. He took pride in what he did and made sure he gave his best every time, even if it wasn't the kind of role he really wanted. His work ethic stayed strong, and fans continued to support him for decades. He became a familiar face on American television, one of the few actors who could carry an action show almost entirely on his own. But with the fame and attitude came some dark turns. And up next, we'll look at the personal relationships that started to fall apart behind the spotlight. Secret family life. Long before Robert Conrad became a television star, he made a life-changing decision that most teenagers wouldn't even consider. He got married. In 1952, at just 17 years old, he married Joan Kenley. The two had met in Chicago, and despite their young age, they committed to building a life together. For Robert, who had grown up with an absent father and a hard-working single mother, starting a family was his way of creating the stability he never had as a child. Their marriage would last more than 25 years, a rare achievement in the entertainment world. Together, they had 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. Robert always said his family was his greatest pride. while his public image was full of tough guy roles and action stunts. At home, he tried to be a father who showed up and stayed involved. Even when work got busy, he made time to be around his kids whenever he could. During the early years of their marriage, times were tough. Robert was still figuring out his career, working odd jobs to support his growing family. Joan stayed home and raised the children while he hustled to make ends meet. Their bond was strong in those days. They weren't rich or famous yet, but they had each other, and that mattered more than anything. As Robert's career began to take off in the late 1950s and 1960s, his world changed dramatically. He went from being a struggling young man in Chicago to a television star known across the country. Fame brought money, opportunity, and respect, but it also brought pressure, distance, and temptation. For someone who had married so young, the demands of Hollywood made it hard to stay grounded. There were also personal demons that Robert struggled with, including a growing ego and the kind of pressure that only success can bring. He was fiercely proud and sometimes controlling. He admitted later in life that he wasn't always the easiest person to live with. Fame didn't change his love for his family, but it changed the way he showed it. Over time, the distance between him and Joan began to grow. By the mid-1970s, the cracks in Robert and Joan's marriage could no longer be ignored. After 25 years together, the couple quietly separated and finalized their divorce in 1977. It was not a loud or bitter breakup, but it marked a turning point in Robert Conrad's life. The man who had once built his world around family was now on his own, navigating the pressures of fame without his longtime partner by his side. And soon, we'll get into that second marriage, the one that raised eyebrows and brought a new kind of attention he wasn't ready for. A scandalous marriage. After his long first marriage ended in 1977, Robert Conrad took some time before entering another serious relationship. Then, in the late 1970s, he met Lavelda Fan. Their meeting sparked a relationship that would later become a major talking point, not just because of who they were, but because of the large age difference between them. Robert met Lavelda when she was just 17 years old, and he was already in his early 40s. At the time, he was still a well-known figure in Hollywood, although his peak fame had begun to fade. Lavelda was a beauty queen. She had won the title of Miss National Teenager, and Conrad had been the MC of the event where they met. Their relationship developed quickly despite their age gap, and it didn't take long before they were a couple. In 1983, the two got married. Robert was 48. Lavelda was in her early 20s. The marriage caught the attention of the media and the public right away. Many people were surprised by the decision. The age difference, as well as the timing of the relationship, made headlines. Some saw it as a midlife crisis move for Conrad, while others believed it was simply two people falling in love on their own terms. Regardless of opinion, the marriage became a part of his public story. Over time, the couple had 3 children together. Conrad once again became a father later in life, and he tried to build a new version of the family life he had once lost. He often said in interviews that family meant everything to him. With Lavelda, he hoped to create a fresh start, one that gave him a chance to be both a husband and a dad again. Even though Robert Conrad seemed committed to this new chapter of life, the public wasn't always kind about it. The age gap between him and Lavelda continued to follow them for years. Critics and gossip columns often pointed out the difference, making it a regular topic in entertainment news. Some people believed the relationship wasn't appropriate, while others simply didn't understand it. Either way, it drew attention. As Conrad's fame declined, the spotlight on his personal life only grew stronger. In the 1980s and 1990s, he was no longer the TV star dominating prime time. Instead, he was seen more often in smaller TV movies and occasional guest appearances. Because of that, his off-screen life became more interesting to some than his acting work. tabloids jumped at the chance to cover him, especially when controversy or drama was involved. The marriage to Lavelda was often used as an example of how different his life had become since the height of his career. While he kept most of their life private, there was still enough public curiosity to keep their relationship in the headlines from time to time. For fans who had admired him as the rugged, all-American action hero, this new version of Conrad, older, more reclusive, and in a much younger marriage, was hard to reconcile with the image they once knew. At the same time, Conrad was trying to stay relevant. He attempted to reinvent himself, both personally and professionally. But it didn't always work. The industry had changed, and he found it harder to land major roles. While he stayed busy with small projects, public interest was more focused on his personal life, especially when it came to his marriage to Lavelda. After nearly 3 decades together, Robert and Lavelda's marriage came to an end in 2010. The divorce was not surrounded by scandal or drama in the public eye, but it was clear that their relationship had run its course. At that point, Robert was in his 70s and facing serious health challenges. The divorce marked the quiet end of his effort to build a second, stable family life. The end of his second marriage closed a long chapter of his personal life, one where he tried to start over, but couldn't quite escape the shadow of his earlier years. And coming up, we'll look at the legal trouble that brought even more chaos into Robert's already complicated world. The nightlife punch. In 1971, Robert Conrad found himself in serious legal trouble that would stain his reputation for years to come. The incident happened at a nightclub in Los Angeles, where he was accused of punching another man during an argument. The fight reportedly started over a disagreement that quickly got out of hand. Witnesses claimed Conrad threw the first punch, knocking the man to the ground. Conrad, on the other hand, insisted it was self-defense. He said the man had been aggressive and threatening toward him, and he felt the need to protect himself. At the time, he was still well known for the Wild Wild West, which had ended just 2 years earlier. He was trying to maintain his career momentum, and the last thing he needed was bad press. But the incident quickly made headlines, especially because it played into the image people already had of him, a hot-tempered, tough guy who didn't back down from a fight. Once the incident went public, Conrad fought the charges head-on. He hired lawyers and took the matter seriously, determined to protect his reputation. His legal team worked hard to prove that he had acted in self-defense and wasn't the aggressor. But the case still dragged on, and even though it never went to trial, the details stayed in the news for months. Eventually, the case was settled out of court. While the legal consequences were minimal, the damage had already been done in the public eye. The case showed how easily Conrad could be pulled into real-life conflict, and it confirmed the belief that he let his emotions take over too easily. Many people believed the story, even if no official conviction came out of it. The 1971 assault case hurt Robert Conrad's image. Before this, he was seen mostly as a charming action star. After the case, more people began to view him as someone who might be just as aggressive off-screen as he was on. It added to a growing narrative in the press that he was difficult, stubborn, and short-tempered. And not long after, things would only get worse when a much more serious accident changed his life forever. The crash that ruined him. In March 2003, Robert Conrad's life took a devastating and irreversible turn. The actor, then 68 years old, was driving his Jaguar in the hills of Sierra Madre, California, when he crossed the center line and collided head-on with another car. The crash happened on a winding stretch of road and left both drivers seriously injured. When police arrived at the scene, it quickly became clear that alcohol had played a major role in the accident. Conrad was found to be heavily intoxicated. His blood alcohol level was measured at 0.22%, more than twice the legal limit in California. Emergency responders had to remove him from his vehicle, and he was taken to the hospital with serious injuries. The other driver, A 26-year-old man named Kevin Burnett also suffered major injuries. Burnett, a construction worker at the time, had to undergo multiple surgeries and faced a long road to recovery. For both men, the crash would mark a turning point, but in very different ways. For Conrad, it meant not just physical pain, but the complete collapse of the life and career he had spent decades building. Conrad himself sustained major injuries in the crash, including spinal damage. He was left partially paralyzed on the right side of his body. From that point on, he struggled with basic mobility, balance, and coordination. It was the kind of injury that took away his independence. And for someone known for doing his own stunts and being physically strong, it was deeply painful. After the crash, Conrad faced serious legal trouble. He was charged with felony drunk driving causing injury, which carried potential jail time. In court, the facts of the case were clear. Conrad was intoxicated, behind the wheel, and had caused significant harm to another person. He pleaded no contest to the felony DUI charge and, in 2004, was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest. In addition to the house arrest, he was required to complete alcohol counseling and pay restitution to the other driver. For someone who had once lived in the spotlight and walked red carpets, the sentence marked a low point. The punishment may not have included jail, but the impact on his life was massive. The crash and the legal outcome destroyed what was left of Conrad's public image. He had already been viewed by some as a difficult and sometimes reckless person, but this incident gave the media and the public a concrete example of what that recklessness could lead to. Headlines were brutal, and the once respected star of the Wild Wild West was now most often mentioned in the context of a drunk driving scandal. The physical injuries from the crash were serious and long-lasting. Conrad never fully recovered. The partial paralysis on his right side affected everything from walking to simple tasks like writing or holding objects. He could no longer live the active lifestyle he had always embraced. His days of horseback riding, fistfights on set, and dangerous stunts were over. He became reclusive after the crash. While he had never been a fan of the Hollywood party scene, he withdrew even more from public life. He rarely appeared at events and gave only a handful of interviews in the years that followed. In those rare conversations, he admitted the regret he felt, not just for the injuries he caused the other driver, but for how far he had fallen. Conrad openly expressed his remorse. He said the accident had changed him and that he wished he could take it back. Still, those words didn't seem to bring him peace. Friends and fans noticed how much he had aged after the crash. He was visibly thinner and slower and seemed to carry a sadness that hadn't been there before. Emotionally, the crash broke something in him. For a man who had always prided himself on strength, control, and confidence, losing his independence and hurting someone else in the process was a deep emotional wound. The accident didn't just take away his career, it took away his identity. After the crash, Robert Conrad's personal life also began to fall apart. His second marriage to Lavelda Fan, already under strain, began to unravel further. The stress of his injuries, legal problems, and emotional struggles placed a heavy burden on their relationship. In 2010, they divorced after nearly 3 decades of marriage. The fallout didn't end there. Conrad became distant from several of his children for long stretches of time. The man who once prided himself on being a devoted father now found himself estranged from parts of his family. There were reports of tension and miscommunication. While he remained close to some of his children, the harmony of his earlier family life was gone. His career, too, came to a complete stop. While he had been taking fewer roles in the years before the crash, the accident made it impossible for him to work again. No director was going to cast an actor who was partially paralyzed and unable to perform. His voice work, which had once offered a fallback option, also dried up. After 2003, Robert Conrad's name all but disappeared from Hollywood projects. A lonely goodbye. After his 2003 drunk driving conviction and the serious injuries that followed, Robert Conrad quietly stepped away from public life. Once a bold, headline-making TV star, he now chose privacy. He retreated from Hollywood entirely and lived the rest of his life away from cameras and interviews. Conrad settled in Thousand Oaks, California. The man who once thrived on fast-paced roles and on-screen action was now living a restricted and quiet life. He could no longer move the way he once had, and his body, especially the right side, which had been partially paralyzed from the crash, no longer allowed for much independence. The home he lived in during those years became his refuge, far removed from the world that had once celebrated him. Though he had once been a familiar name in homes across America, Robert was rarely seen or heard from in his later years. He no longer appeared at fan events, on red carpets, or even on talk shows. He avoided the spotlight entirely. Occasionally, he would speak on the radio or give short interviews, but even those became rare. For the most part, he disappeared from the public view. In addition to the paralysis from the crash, Robert Conrad developed neurological problems in his final years. These issues made basic tasks harder and required regular medical attention. His memory and ability to speak clearly sometimes faded. He required care from his family and, at times, professional caregivers. His once powerful frame had weakened. The strong, athletic man who had done his own stunts and taken pride in never backing down was now dependent on others. He rarely left the house. His condition forced him to slow down in every way. Those who visited him during this time described a man who was still sharp mentally, but weighted down by the past and by physical pain. Despite all this, Conrad still had moments of pride, humor, and reflection. He enjoyed time with his children and grandchildren. When possible, he stayed close to a few members of his family who remained supportive through his health issues and emotional struggles. Robert Conrad died on February 8, 2020, at the age of 84. The cause of death was heart failure. He passed away in his home in Malibu, California, surrounded by his family. His daughter, Nancy Conrad, confirmed the news to the press. Despite being one of TV's biggest stars in the 1960s and 1970s, his death did not receive wide coverage. There were no major Hollywood tributes or televised memorials. Outside of longtime fans and a few entertainment news outlets, the news of his passing was quietly acknowledged and soon faded from the headlines. There was no large public funeral. His family kept things private, in line with the quiet life he had lived in his final years. While tributes appeared on social media and fan pages, the broader entertainment world largely moved on without pause. Conrad's final years were somber, shaped by physical pain, emotional regret, and the feeling of being forgotten. The man who once captured the imagination of millions died quietly, far removed from the spotlight he had once ruled. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss more on the lives of Hollywood's most iconic stars.